Hi friends, my name is Sheniz Janmohamed and I'm a poet, author, writer, I guess that's similar sort of, um, arts educator, spoken word artist, and a graduate of the creative writing program at the University of Guelph Humber. And I'm honored to be with you today. I'm sorry I'm not there in person, but I know you're probably being inspired every minute with new ideas and new possibilities for your writing practice. So I hope you're taking it all in and making notes and friends. So I was asked to answer a few questions uh, about creative writing, about my practice, and how I might be able to support what you're doing. So, the first question or reflection really is, what does creative writing mean to you? So, I think for me, I started writing when I was very young. I was 7 or 8, and I just knew that I wanted to tell stories. And I think we all have those moments in our lives, especially as children, where we want to tell someone's story and we want to create story from whatever we find around us and make sense of the world in some ways, in a world that doesn't often make sense. So I think really meant everything to me at that time to be able to have an outlet and to really not know the impact of that outlet until much later in my teens, where I didn't fit in and I was one of few writers of color in my high school, and I needed to find a way to be creative and express what was happening in my mind and my heart in a safe way. And that's what creative writing did for me. And I think people redefine the form every time they write and every time they create. So, in order for it to stay creative, it needs to be redefined. And the next question is, what is a ghazal? That's a big question. And how did you come to work in the ghazal form? So maybe I'll start first with how I came to work in this form. So I was doing my master's in creative writing at, as I had mentioned, the University of Guelph Humber, and my poetry professor was Dion Brand. And she wanted to push the boundaries of poetic expression and get us to explore different poetic forms. And one day she came to class and she said, "Hey, today we're going to write a ghazal." And I thought, what? How can you write a ghazal? Because my experience of a ghazal was as a sung form. It's a form that dates back to 7th century Persia, and it consists of couplets with equal length that often have rhyming or repeating refrains. So I've always heard the ghazal sung in Urdu, in traditional South Asian languages and Middle Eastern languages. I've never actually heard it being a written form. And Dion said to me, "Well, there's a whole tradition of Western writers writing in the ghazal form as a literary form, not an oral tradition." So I thought, oh, well, let me try this out and see how my first ghazal goes. And it was terrible. It was probably the worst piece of crap I've written in a long time. and I was ready to give up on it. And Dion said, "You know what? Just stick with the form. I think that there's something about it, and there's something about the topics that you're addressing in your writing that would be a good match for this form." And the ghazal often uses themes of longing, separation from the beloved, concepts of home and belonging and not belonging. And so those were things that were close to my heart, as many writers may attest to. And then I just stuck with the form. When Dion Brand tells you stick with the form, you stick with the form. And I ended up doing my first short manuscript as a collection of ghazals, and that went on to be published. So the tip is, instead of trying to write a ghazal all at once, think of how you might create refrains first. So let's say I wanted to write a refrain around my grandmother's ring. This ring. There you go. You can make the appropriate sound effects. I'm waiting. Yeah. I might want to create a ghazal that consists of rhyming refrains. So it would be, and this is super easy because, ring is easy to rhyme with. So it might be string, fling, thing. Hopefully you won't use thing. Bling. You can think of a whole slew of words. And then I would go through those words and choose the most interesting, or the words that I could create the most context with, and then build the ghazal around those refrains. So that's an easier approach to the ghazal. Another thing you could do is, if you're doing a repetitive refrain, so you're using ring in every couplet, you would have to think about how many ways you can use the context of a ring. So it could be, you could be referring to the ring on a finger, you could be referring to a circus ring, you could be referring to a phone ringing, you could be referring to a boxing ring. So even if the refrain is just ring, you're building the context around it so that you're creating a different use for that word in each refrain. And that's the objective of the ghazal, is that you should be able to lift a couplet from a ghazal and have it be a complete thought. So there's no incompleteness about it. And it's such a challenging form. It's a form that I think is beneficial to every poet or everyone who aspires to write poetry, because it requires you to think in new patterns and new ways. And even if you're, a fiction writer, there could be possibilities that you discover just from practicing writing in a different form, like poetry. The forest burns with autumn's fire. Fallen leaves are strewn like ashen gold. Trees jeweled emerald, ochre, rust, and rose, hues they can no longer withhold. In the palm of my hand, a crumbling acorn, a tree with roots that will never take hold. Soon snow will spin these woods into silence, and the last leaf blackened by the cold. One of the most life-changing experiences for me as a writer was having access to mentors. So I think, if I were to give you any advice, it would be, ask people to look at your work. Ask people to give you their advice and their feedback, but also be with people. Think about how being in community with other writers and being of use to your mentors. So maybe they don't know as much about social media as you do, so you could maybe support them in that way, and then they could exchange that support with editing your first manuscript or looking over a poem you want to submit to a magazine. So think about how you might build relationships with your mentors, and how you might build relationships with the community you feel you belong to or want to belong to. Because that really is what sustains you when the work isn't as frequent and you're not sure what the hell you're doing or why you're doing it. It's those people that remind you and that keep you grounded. And that said, if you're looking for a mentor, if you're looking for someone to support and guide your practice and model a practice for you, don't be afraid just to ask. My first mentor was Rishma Dunlop, who was a York U prof, And she actually responded to an email that I thought she would never respond to, but she did. And that email was life-changing because it led to our first meeting, our first coffee. And that coffee led to her writing a reference letter for me that I don't know whether it sealed the deal, but I know it had an impact on why I got into my master's in creative writing. So you never know where those strings lead and where those connections lead. But make sure you also understand that the people that you admire may also be struggling and may also need your support. So find ways of building that support in the way that you know how. And if you have any other questions, or you want to pick my brain, or you want me to be your mentor, which I would love to be, you can send me an email. It's going to pop up here, hopefully, if I do this right. And hopefully we can connect. Enjoy the rest of the conference, and thank you so much to the organizers. Give them a round of applause. Really appreciate the work that you're doing, and thank you for continuing to build community.